Hello there. It's October 30th, 2017. My name is Jeff Merritt, and I'm here with Darrell Rhudy. And we're going to learn a lot about Mr. Rhudy. So, Mr. Rhudy, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
All right. You mind if I call you Darrell?
That's fine.
Okay. All right, Darrell, what is your full name and your birthday, including the year?
Darrell, that's D-A-R-R-E-L-L. Many ways to spell that. Lee, L-E-E, and Rhudy is R-H-U-D-Y.
I'm glad you spelled that, because that is a little bit different.
Somebody put an H in it. I guess he was a hellraiser or something.
Okay, where were you born at?
I was born in Kansas City, Missouri.
Kansas City, Missouri. Were you named after anyone?
I was named after a cousin of my mother's who died in not childbirth, but as a 4, 5, 6-year-old.
Okay.
And she liked the name. So.
All right. Did you live in Kansas City while you all through your all the way up to adulthood, or through childhood? Or did you move around when you were young?
Well, I was born in 1930, 9 months after Black Friday.
Okay.
In 1929.
Right.
So things were real tough, and my parents lived there for 2 years. Finally saved up enough money after losing what they'd already had in the bank in the crash. Saved up enough money to start on a small scale farming.
Okay.
And we moved to southwestern Kansas, about 120 miles from Kansas City.
Do you remember
when I was 2 years old, 1932.
32, okay.
That's when eggs were 10 cents a dozen.
Right. Now, you're probably too old to remember the Depression, but do you remember your parents talking about the Depression?
My father, being a farmer, but he worked some in WPA, in local projects that were going on.
Right.
I remember having a leather coat supplied by the government, came through his work. We had fruit like oranges and grapefruit and all, also through the, I don't know what program it was.
Were they rationing them out? Is that what it was?
Well, rationing, yeah, if your parents were working there, your family got so much.
Oh.
Depending on how many kids they had, I guess.
Okay. What's the earliest memory you have of your childhood?
Earliest actual memory?
Yes.
Oh, gee, you really want to know that?
Yeah, I do.
Well, my father had a neighbor come over and help him make male hogs into schultz, or whatever they call them.
Sure.
Where they take certain parts out of the male.
Right.
And I was watching it entranced, and the guy said, "Here," and handed me something, and I opened my hand, and he threw them in my hand. And I went screaming to the house.
Oh.
I told you didn't want to know that.
Okay, well, good to know, but we'll move on.
That's I must have been about 4 or 5.
Okay. When you were growing up, was there always enough food to eat? Did you ever go without anything that you can remember?
No, it would not have been the things we necessarily wanted to eat.
Right, right.
But no, we always had enough food. My father was a farmer his entire life.
Okay. Now,
after Kansas City.
How old was he when he passed on?
66.
66.
He fought bladder cancer for 10 or 11 years.
Okay. What about your mom? How old was she?
She was 92 and a half when she passed away, just after the 9/11 thing in 01.
Okay.
Yes.
Was there any health issues in your family that some of your relatives might want to be aware of, that you can remember, that might have skipped some generations but may reoccur in another generation? I know you said your dad had bladder cancer.
There was, and my mom had lymphoma. Eventually took her at 92 and a half. Other than, there was some heart disease, and I had a cousin that had, I only had 36 cousins on my mother's side and 15 on my father's side.
Okay.
But I only know of a cousin that died principally of her diabetes.
Okay. All right. Were you fortunate enough to make it all through grade school? And did you have a chance to go to school after grade school?
Well, I went to country school, one-room schools,
Did you?
two of them,
Wow.
2.5 years in one, and what is it, 6.5 in the other, 5.5 in the other, through 8th grade. Never had more than 12, 15 kids in the building at any time, one teacher. And then I went to a local high school that had a total of about 200 students in all 4 grades.
Okay. What year did you graduate high school?
1948,
What high school was that?
Girard, Kansas.
Girard, Kansas. Okay. 1948. Do you remember your favorite subject in school?
It would probably have been math. Yeah, probably math and science.
Okay. Did you attend any schools after high school?
I was the only member of my graduating class of 47 that went to the University of Kansas at Lawrence, where I majored in pharmacy for 4 years.
Wow. Okay. Nice. Did you play any sports through school?
Played a little ball in softball in high school, and softball and football and basketball, or no, not really basketball, in college in the intramural sports.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember those.
At age 11, I had osteomyelitis and had 2 different operations, and at one point they were considering taking the leg off at the knee. And fortunately, sulfa drugs came out at that time, 1941.
41.
The military had them during the war, but they weren't, we couldn't get them until then. And they knocked it out with that.
Okay. Speaking of the military, did you ever have an opportunity to serve?
When the Korean War broke out, my buddy that sat next to me, his name was Rhudy, so we sat next to each other for 4 years. We went down to the Navy recruiters and volunteered. Turned out they didn't like the fact I had had osteomyelitis, and he turned out to be colorblind.
How about that?
The Navy wanted pilots, and we wanted to be pilots.
Right.
So we gave up on that. So I figured the Army would take me for sure. And the last station during the physical, the last semester of my college, they turned me down because of the osteomyelitis, so I didn't serve.
Okay. How old were you when you started dating?
When I started dating, I had a couple of, really only had one steady girlfriend my senior year of high school. I'd had a few dates with other girls before that.
Okay.
But then in college I started dating.
Okay. And You are married,
Yes.
and what's her first name and last name and date of birth?
Well, I will say, I'm married for the second time.
Okay,
I was married to Laura, Lora, Jane Dunmeyer of Spring Hill, Kansas. She was at the university, and we were married on December 21st of 1952, shortly after graduation from college. And we were married for 63 years. And she passed away in May of 15. And in February of 16, I married Elaine Dees, who was living in the same sort of facility as we're in now, but here in Raleigh. And we moved in here and were married right in February of last year.
okay. Do you have any children?
We have 3. The company that I went to work for sent me to Raleigh, North Carolina to begin. I was a salesman in the field selling pharmaceuticals, and came here and worked a couple of weeks and went back to Kansas City and got married. Brought my bride back here, and we had a daughter at Rex Hospital here in Raleigh, the old Rex. And 3 years here, and the company moved me to Kansas City, back near our homes. And we had a son there, Paul. Our daughter, Leanne, was born in Raleigh. Then I got moved to New York, and from there to that's the home office. And from there back to Fullerton, California, in the LA area, and we had a son there, Ross.
Okay.
So the first one and the last one, Leanne and Ross, live in Raleigh,
Okay.
and Paul, the middle one, lives over near Asheville in Black Mountain.
Okay. Do you remember if you were strict as a parent?
Yeah, but because I was gone so much in sales, my wife had the initial, but if it was serious enough, I had to be the enforcer.
Okay. All right. Do you remember your grandparents?
My paternal grandfather died when I was about 1.5 years old. So I was at his funeral, but I have no memory of that. My paternal grandmother, I remember her very well, Rose Schneider. And my father's parents, I remember them very well. They started their family, and all 6 were born back in Virginia, and they moved to Kansas for good farming land in 1921, and lived out their lives in that Girard area where I went to high school.
Right. Now, I know, well, I've been told that back in the early 1900s, on up to 1950 to 60, people got married at a younger age. Would you happen to remember any of your great-grandparents?
My oh no,
No.
they never lived long enough for
Right, okay.
for me to have known them.
Okay. You said you had no childhood diseases that you can remember.
The measles. The one I remember is whooping cough.
Okay, you did have a
I thought that was going to kill me. That was terrible.
Were you a child when you had that?
Yeah, I would have been somewhere around 12,
Okay.
11 or 12.
Have you ever been in a serious accident?
A serious accident. The most serious accident has happened recently when I fell and got a brain concussion.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
Really?
just out in the back, up on the hill,
Oh.
back there.
But you're okay now, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
fine.
I noticed a scar on your knee.
Oh, that was, I've done a lot of woodworking in my life, and that was a very careless accident with a skill saw.
It looks like it could have been bad.
It looks like I've had knee surgery, but that's just stitches.
Do you remember where you were when President Kennedy was assassinated?
Yes, I did quite a bit of initial teaching of newly hired salesmen. A lot of product knowledge involved in selling pharmaceuticals. And I had 6 men that I had in my rec room for a week, or for 2 weeks actually. And we went to lunch each day down at a good pizza place, and we were sitting there and placed our order, and the TV was, I said, "What's going on that TV?" And they said, "President Kennedy's just been shot."
Mm-hmm.
So I remember that very, very well.
What about Martin Luther King?
Don't have any vivid memories. I couldn't tell you what year it was.
He was shot in the late 60s, but as far as assassinated. But if I remember right, I think 68, around 68, 67, 68. Is there anything that happened in your life that kind of changed the course of your life?
That changed it. Yeah, I guess so. I said my favorite subject was probably math.
Right.
And I was pre-enrolled in engineering. I went up to orientation week at the university, and it seemed like 2 out of 3 boys I met were all going into engineering. And I thought, man, it's going to be so crowded in engineering. And I had spent a year, my senior year in high school, working in the drugstore in town. And I thought a pharmacy would be a good second thing, using my science that I like too.
Right.
And I made a choice and went into pharmacy. And I really should, as I look back on it, I should have gone into engineering. That I've built houses and furniture and 2 mountain cabins, and development would have been right down my alley, I think.
Well, that's interesting. So your hobbies is engineering, basically engineering different things. Have you ever met any famous people? Anybody that would be considered famous in your life?
What? People that thousands of other people would know.
Right.
No, not really. No, I don't think I have.
What about vacations? Were you able, or have you been able to travel any? And do you have a favorite place that you?
Oh, my favorite place. Well, shortly before I retired, and I did retire early. I retired at 55.
Wow, I'll be 55 next month.
Okay.
Yeah, in 2 weeks actually.
I have a son who's 56, and he's not retired yet. We started traveling, and after I retired, we traveled quite a bit. Europe and Australia, New Zealand.
Wow.
I've spent 2 or 3 trips up in Alaska, which is probably my favorite place that I've traveled to. Bavaria is second, close second.
Right. Somebody might be interested to know what experiences you remember when it comes to desegregation. When I talk to my father, my father and my mother, who are both in their mid-70s, they say they can remember when it was common for the schools were segregated, and the buses, the African Americans actually rode in the back of the bus. They remembered that. They said they've seen the transition from where it was to where it is now. Can you remember, I mean, vividly?
In my hometown, we lived on a farm just 2 miles out. It was 3 miles from the high school building. There were 2 black families in town. And one of them, I think, had 3 or 4 kids, and the other one had 10. And I went to high school with them. The grade school was out, as I said, in one-room schoolhouses, and there were no minorities out there at all. So that was my first connection with minorities. And of course, I was at the University of Kansas. At that time, minorities wouldn't have been 5% of the student population, only 3%. I know there was a black men's fraternity that in school. In pharmacy school, a pharmacy buddy, I told you the guy I tried to sign up in the Navy with was my best friend. Probably my second best friend was a black boy.
How about that?
Yeah. He sat about 2 seats from us for 4 years.
That would have been in the 50s, wouldn't it?
This was
late 50s?
48 to 52.
48 to 52. Wow. So you really, where you grew up and where you went to college, it sounds like you didn't experience segregation, not like the South.
Now, I worked in Raleigh, North Carolina. I was headquartered in Raleigh, and my sales territory went to the coast, to Wilmington, and as far as Salisbury. And of course, our job was to go to doctors' offices and wait to see them and tell them all about our pharmaceuticals.
Right.
And there were blacks in the waiting rooms, all those years. But of course, where we lived in an apartment at Cameron Village, there were no blacks nearby there.
Politics today, I'm sure, is not like politics were when you were growing up. Do you mind telling us what affiliation you're with politically, and has it changed over the years?
My parents lost every dime that they had accumulated in the crash. Their bank in Girard, Kansas went belly up. Okay, they lost, I think it was $800.
Wow.
800 was a lot of money.
Right.
Back in 1928, 29.
Right.
Well, particularly it would have been a lot of money in 30.
Right.
So they moved. They were in Detroit at that time. Dad worked in automobile factories. And they all closed down. So they moved to Kansas City, and he got a job down in the rail yards loading ice into boxcars to ship meat and all that.
How about that?
And they saved enough money then in 2 years, in 1932, to go to the farm. Well, you think they were Republicans when Hoover was in the presidency when the crash? They were Democrats all their lives. My mother was a precinct committee woman until she was 83 years old.
Wow.
And moved from Girard, Kansas to Independence Village here in Raleigh to be near us. She had a lot of not liberal, but conservative ideas, feelings.
Right.
And I always said, Mom, you don't know it, but you're mostly a Republican. I just set her off. So I voted, yeah, I would have voted for Kennedy. In fact, I guess I did vote for Eisenhower. I would have voted for Kennedy, but they wouldn't let me vote because we were in transit from moving from New York to Fullerton, California, and New York wouldn't let us vote, California wouldn't let us vote, but I would have voted for him. And within 4 years, I just did a complete turn around. I'm very conservative.
I want you to think about your grandchildren watching this, and possibly your great-grandchildren, and if we're lucky, even your great-great-grandchildren. If you had to give them some advice, because you've lived a life, and you've obviously been successful, and you've done a lot of things right, maybe you've made some mistakes along the way, but what advice would you give your family, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, to be as successful or more successful as you are?
Well, it's to be honest, to prepare yourself for the career that you think you want, and to work hard, do your very best, but unlike me, don't forget a little toot for your own horn. I never asked for a raise. I never asked for a promotion. And I saw men who I'm pretty sure were no more capable than I was, who did and got it.
Right.
And it was a little late before I realized that. So, I don't mean for anybody to be a braggart to that point.
Right.
But be aware of how you stack up against others.
Okay, good. Is there anything else that you would like to share that you can think about, a story from way back when you were young or when you were a young adult, an incident that happened that you think would be interesting enough that if you didn't tell it now, it probably would never have been told, would never be told?
I don't know.
And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but it's
Something that has not come up that should be brought up was after I retired, my plan was to continue my woodworking. I built cabinets and some furniture for other people as well as ourselves. But I stumbled on, I had used a lathe. I built grandfather clocks and I'd made columns and finials for those on a little lathe that I bought. But I stumbled upon the fact that there was a market for lathe-turned bowls and vases. And I got into that 3 years after I retired, age 58, and I spent 27 years in all my spare time making bowls and vases. I made over 14,000 of them.
Wow.
Things as big as this and bigger.
Right.
And smaller too. And that was very rewarding.
How about that?
I really loved the fact that people liked something that I made.
Right. Now, were you able to sell them? I know you enjoyed doing them, but were you able to sell them too?
I sold every one.
How about that? So
I probably gave away about 1,000 over the years.
Right.
But I sold 14,000 plus pieces.
So that's great. Well, good for you for being able to retire at 55, 56 years old. I can't even see retirement in my future, so I applaud you for that.
Well, I think back to the day that they had a little retirement party for me, at the office. probably 50, 60 people. And I was asked to give a little talk, which I did. And I finished, and somebody in the back said, "Why are you retiring so early?" And I said, "Because there's some other things I'd like to do." And I saw heads in the audience nodding. They would like to do it too.
Well, I'm sure they would. How many years were you with that company?
33 years. Next month marks 32 years I've been retired. So another year I will have, yeah, I love to say, I give the actuaries fits.
I bet.
I wasn't supposed to live this long.
That's funny. Darrell, seriously, I'm serious. This has been a pleasure meeting you and pleasure getting to know you a little bit better. And I hope I know your family will appreciate you doing this. And thank you for coming in today.
Well, it's been enjoyable, and I appreciate you taking
Oh,
the time to come and do this.
well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. All right, that's a wrap.